Okay, thanks for your patience. Thanks everyone for joining this morning. My name is Ben. I'm a strategist here at Argentum Consultants, and I'm very glad to be here this morning with you all to talk about European governmental grants for the climate, energy, and mobility sectors. What we'll do for today is we'll discuss specifically competitive versus high success rate grants and how you can maximize your non-dilutive funding efforts. We'll spend some time discussing Argentum and our unique multi-submission strategy, and then we'll focus on upcoming Cluster 5 funding opportunities and how to tailor the right opportunity to the right project in your R&D pipeline. The webinar will run just about 30 minutes, so we'll finish around just after 11:30, and wishing us all a very productive webinar today. So let's get started, and let's start by looking at competitive versus high success rate grants. Now, as you know, within the EU ecosystem, applicants have multiple opportunities to go for non-dilutive funding. And unlike investments, grant proposals focus purely on future activities and require you as the applicant to be involved in active R&D. Now, within the European system, there are dozens and hundreds of funding opportunities for non-dilutive funding. So our question is, both for Cluster 5 and actually for any sector, how to choose the right grant for you. Now, our approach at Argentum is that there are benefits to applying to both competitive grants, which we'll go over, and to grants that have relatively higher success rates. And later we'll discuss what we mean by higher success rate. Now, our approach is that strategically speaking, the best way for you to maximize your grant portfolio and increase your chances of non-dilutive funding is to go for both, to go for high success rate grants and to go for competitive grants, and by doing so, to increase your chances overall. Now, that's what we'll be examining today, and we'll start by looking specifically first at competitive grants, then at higher success rate, then we'll look a bit at Argentum, and then we'll dive into specific funding opportunities and go over upcoming deadlines for Cluster 5 opportunities. So let's start with why you as an applicant should go for competitive grants. Now, the grants that we consider as competitive are the ones that you might be more familiar with, specifically the ones from the EIC track, the European Innovation Council, the primarily ones being the EIC Accelerator and EIC Pathfinder. Alongside also Horizon Europe consortia-based calls are considered very competitive. Now, when we say competitive, for EIC tracks, the commonly known success rate for EIC Accelerator is around 5%. For Pathfinder, that will be between 6 to 8%, depending on the track, whether Pathfinder Open or Pathfinder Challenge. Now, this should not discourage you from applying for such tracks. We maintain that in order to increase your chances of success, it's very important to follow 4 very, very significant steps. First is to conceptualize your project correctly. Then to spend the right amount of time drafting the proposal. Third is to consolidate the best available consortium if you are going for a consortium-based program such as EIC Pathfinder. And fourth is to work with the right consultants that will elevate your proposal. Now, taken all together, even competitive grants can have higher success rates. And what you should do is look into what is the best opportunity for you at the given time. Now, competitive grants, such as EIC tracks, usually require longer proposal preparation processes that could be in the range of between 10 to 12 weeks for proposal preparation and additional weeks prior to the preparation to spend on the consolidation. So altogether, when going for a competitive grant within Cluster 5 or in general, take the time, spend the right amount of time. We always advise clients, especially for EIC Accelerator, which is the single largest grant for single applicants, take the time, spend it, prepare the best possible proposal, and you will increase your chances. Now, winning a competitive grant can showcase your company's innovation and expertise on an EU level and may pave the way to securing future grants, either competitive grants or more accessible grants with higher success rates. But what about these calls with higher success rates? So within the grants world, when we talk about a relatively high success rate, we take that to mean 25 plus chances of success. With some programs, such as the ones that we'll examine later, specifically from the Eureka framework, you might participate in a program that has a very high success rate that could be as high as 50%. Now, if the very competitive calls tend to be on a cross-European levels, with certain exceptions that we'll discuss later, generally speaking, the calls with a higher success rate tend to be either national or bilateral based calls, and also cascade funding, which we'll touch upon at the end of this webinar. So again, you have multiple options. We'll review those in a couple of slides. And going for a call with a higher success rate doesn't preclude you from going to a call that's very, very competitive. And just as we were saying for the competitive calls as the EIC tracks or Horizon Europe, should you win a national bilateral call or a cascade funding call, that could well bring your company into contact with either new clients, a completely new market, or to all over boost your potential to go for further grants. So all in all, what we at Argentum suggest is not to limit your grant applications to one of these options. Instead of going for one major call, be that Horizon Europe call, EIC Accelerator, or one of the Eureka calls, what we suggest, what we believe in, is to construct a submission plan that plays to your advantages and takes into account all of your R&D activities and allows you to go for multiple submissions throughout a given time frame, let's say of a year, and then to make the best of the available grants in the EU, be those competitive and calls with higher success rate. Now, before we'll turn to explore relevant funding opportunities, let's take just a couple of slides to discuss Argentum and our model. So Argentum specializes in EU research and innovation funding. We were established in 1999 and since then have had vast experience and gained expertise in obtaining governmental funding for innovation, technology, research, and development. We currently have around 30 employees and are divided into 3 departments. The consulting department that prepares a proposal and supports all proposal preparation with you, the strategy department, which I'm part of, and the business development department. Now, our vision is to target innovative funding opportunities and to enhance participation and success in multinational research and innovation projects. So far, Argentum's expertise have led us towards over 1.5 billion euros awarded to our clients. What you can see here is just an overview of the strategy department at Argentum, my department, which I'm very proud to be part of. We are organized along the lines of the Horizon Europe clusters. So we actually match those clusters. As you can see here, we have the 4 major clusters of Horizon Europe represented, those being the health cluster, digital, mobility, energy and climate, and agri-food and environment. As you can also see here, we are very much an international team at the strategy department and at Argentum as a whole. Now, just a word about this. At Argentum, we believe that whilst each sector and each cluster stand by themselves. They are to a great extent interconnected. That is particularly the case for our topic today for Cluster 5, Energy, Climate and Mobility, which intertwines very often with Cluster 4 that deals with digital, space and industry, and with Cluster 6 that deals with environment, raw materials, agri-food and so forth. So by working with us, you will be engaging not just a specific cluster or a specific strategist, but the entirety of our strategy department and our expertise. Before we turn to the funding opportunities, just a quick word about our process of project support. This is true both to projects that require a consortium and for projects for single applications. First, we conceptualize a project with you. That includes deep analysis of the core topic, conceptualizing your role, and preparing a concept note if needed. Then, if applicable, we will support all your actions and activities for consortium consolidation. As a strategist, that's one of the main roles I do. I consolidate consortia for my clients, I go to meetings, I represent you, and so forth. Then we turn to the main event, which is coordination and preparation of the entire project, which is done with you, and our consulting department will support all of your activities, leading up to the submission of the proposal, which is done in several stages. And at the end of the happy proposal preparation, we will submit the proposal online for you. Now, after this very short introduction into Argentum's model, let's turn to look at current funding opportunities for Cluster 5, both competitive and higher success rate calls within climate, energy, and mobility sectors. So Cluster 5 is a very broad and a very hot topic in the EU at the moment. Within the European grant system, specifically within Horizon Europe and the EIC, what we're noticing the last couple of years is that Cluster 5 themes, especially in climate and energy on the one hand and on mobility on the other, even though they are interconnected, are gaining traction and gaining more of a prominent place in Europe. And that's very good news for you as Cluster 5 companies. Now, what we want to look now is the two sections here. We'll start by looking at competitive programs, and then we'll take a look at programs with relatively higher success rate, and we'll try to see why those could be good options for you and why going for both competitive and higher success rates could be a good policy on your behalf. Let's start with the competitive programs, and these are namely, we'll look at a few options starting with the EIC tracks, which you might be more familiar with. So let's start with EIC Accelerator. This, as a lot of you might be familiar, is the largest single grant for a single applicant in the EU. It's up to 2.5 million euros grant, plus an optional equity investment of up to 15 million euros. This is a two-stage call. The first stage could be submitted anytime throughout the year. The second stage, the full proposal, usually have 3 to 4 annual cutoff dates. Once you get a go for the full proposal, you have 12 months to submit that proposal, usually corresponding to said 3-4 annual cutoff dates. The next deadline is in October. The one relevant for applicants starting to work now on an EIC Accelerator proposal will be for early 2024. That would be expected January and March. So those dates should be released around November 2023. Now, whilst EIC Accelerator is a very good opportunity for applications that deal with mid to higher TRLs, 5 to 6 and ending at 8, what if your proposal is very innovative, low TRL, research focused, and is also intended to be consortia based? Then you should be going for the EIC Pathfinder. This is a very also competitive grant. As we mentioned for Accelerator, the let's say unofficial success rate is around 5%. Obviously, we elevate your success rate significantly if we follow the steps that we listed earlier: conceptualization, time management, proposal preparation, and so on. And the same goes for EIC Pathfinder. Now, for Pathfinder, the next available deadline is expected for Pathfinder Open, that's the bottom-up option, is expected in March 24. So that seems like a long way ahead, but actually, since this is a consortium-based program, if you were to start working on such an application by, let's say, in a couple of months, by late 23, consolidating the consortium and preparing the presentation should altogether take a couple of months. So by early 24, you will already be engaging the proposal preparation. So spending the right time and preparing the best proposal isn't just, or we don't see this just as a recommendation, but actually we see this as an integral part of increasing your chances of success. With Accelerator, you're talking about a very large grant of up to 2.5 million for a single applicant. With Pathfinder, you're talking about again, substantial grant of 3 up to 4 million euros at 100% funding rate for a small consortium with an option for bilateral partnership specifically for Pathfinder challenges. Now let's talk about a very unique funding direction that is not that commonly known. This is Sprindi, which is unlike any other grant available at the moment. Sprindi is German funding that is available for non-German applicants. Now, Sprindi is bottom-up, so that's good news for Cluster 5 clients and for applicants in any sector. Sprindi, the focus is on disruptive innovation with commercial potential for Europe and the German market. Now, why you should go for Sprindi is twofold. First, and that's probably the most intriguing for you, unlike other grants, Sprindi has no budget cap. You can, at least on paper, request any budget you like. Now, when I advise my clients about the no cap, I usually tend to say, go for a budget that's substantial, that properly reflects your innovation, and aim for a budget that doesn't exceed 25 million euros. Now, this could be a very, very substantial grant indeed. The other reason why you should go for this grant is because this is a very short proposal to prepare. Now, this should take a couple of weeks, and you could do this alongside doing other proposals. Now, the only caveat, which is not that detrimental in our mind, is that should you be selected for funding, if you are indeed non-German based, you will be required to open an entity in Germany that performs R&D. Seeing as Germany is the largest European market and the leading market for climate, energy, and mobility, that could be a good opportunity for you to engage the German market. Now let's turn to the last very competitive option, and that's Horizon Europe. This is the largest consortia-based program in Europe. And for Cluster 5, there are several destinations within the EU Green Deal and climate action that could be relevant for you. What we've done for today is list below in the next 2 slides 6 calls, just 6, that cover one batch for January 24, the other batch for April 24. So you have enough time to get prepared for those calls, because each consortium requires you to join in advance, and the consortium preparation process and the proposal process should take 3 to 4 months. So even January 2024 is not that far off. Actually, I'd advise my clients who are interested in going for the January 24 calls to start thinking about consortium consolidation and joining consortia fairly soon. So let's look at options that cover all the topics of climate, energy, and mobility up to April 2024 within Cluster 5 of Horizon Europe. What we have here are, first of all, the batch for January 24. And we have 3 calls here. I'm not going to go over the details, particularly. What I wanted to highlight here is a couple of things. First of all, Within cluster 5, again, there's a lot of interconnectivity between energy, climate, and mobility. If we look, for instance, at the second call listed here, demonstration of improved intermediate renewable energy carrier technologies for transport fuels, we can very clearly see how this call brings together climate, energy, and mobility. This is a truly cross-cluster call. It is a mid to high tier role call, tier role 6 to 7, with a very nice budget of 10 million euros per project at 70% funding rate. So here you can see, just as one example, how within Horizon Europe, you have multiple options for different tier roles, different funding levels, and different projects to best suit and match your R&D activities. Now, if you're not going to lead a consortium, you also have the option of joining multiple consortia at the same time. If you are coordinating, that would take a bigger chunk of your time. So I'd not advise you, or I'd not advise my clients to coordinate more than one consortium at a time. But if we look at these calls, what we can see for January is that you have options for mid-range tier role and high tier role, different budget levels, which could require smaller consortia, mid-sized consortia, a lot of options going on here. The same is true for the next batch of calls for April 24. And here we've also listed calls that showcase the interconnectivity of cluster 5. If, for instance, we look at the last call listed here, accelerating climate neutral aviation, minimizing non-CO2 emissions. So true enough, Horizon Europe could come up with catchier titles for calls, but these are informative titles. Now, please note that this call, unlike the others, has a very low TRL of TRL 2 to 4. This is ideal for research-based projects, and as a research-based project and RIA call, Research and Innovation Action in Horizon Europe, this also gets 100% funding rate. So whether you will be going within these competitive calls, which all on paper, all Horizon Europe calls, which are single stage, as all these are, have across the board a success rate of around 10%. Now, again, 10% should not discourage you from approaching these calls, because that's the on paper success rate. Working with us, doing the stages we recommended will elevate your success rates proportionately. So what you can see here for April is that we have a lot of options going on for high tier role, low tier role, different budgets, different topics, a lot to choose from. Now let's turn during the last minutes of our webinar to look at the higher success rate calls. And here we'll discuss particularly the Eureka framework, and we'll close by looking at Cascade funding. Now, Eureka is probably known to a lot of you. Eureka is the world's largest public network at the moment, comprised of around 45 countries for international cooperation in R&D and innovation. The flagship project of Eureka, which a lot of you might be familiar with, is Eurostars. Eurostars is a very, very interesting program. It is completely bottom-up. It is suitable for any bilateral partnership between eligible SMEs. So if you want to go with one partner outside of your own country, that's completely viable within Eurostars. And Eureka Eurostars has an on-paper success rate of 29%. Now, our Argentum success rate currently with Eurostars is much, much higher than that. So we are very confident that should we conceptualize the right project with the right partners, we will have a significant success rate, a chance of success for Eurostars. The next deadlines are for September, that's too close, but the one for March is already published, and you could get started working on a proposal for Eurostars. Now, Eureka also has 5 dedicated clusters. One of those, Eurogia 2030, is tailor-made for cluster 5. This is the low carbon energy cluster. And within Eurogia 2030, you have multiple options to propose a cluster 5 related project. Now, Eurogia has a more limited pool of participants than Eurostar's, that's true, only around 20 participants. However, the success rate of the Eureka clusters, including Euroja, is very, very high. It's around 50%. That's the Eureka success rate. As I mentioned, working with Argentum, we can elevate and do elevate your chances of success even further. Eureka, Euroja is very well supported by Eureka, and this is a two-stage call. So the next deadline is in November, and if you've not yet engaged with this opportunity, this could be the right time to get engaged with us, because this requires a mid-sized consortium. Now we'll close by looking very, very briefly at cascade funding. Now, cascade funding typically offers shorter term projects. They could range 3 to 9 months with smaller grants of usually up to 100,000 euros. Now, yes, these are smaller funding opportunities, but winning any kind of funding, non-dilutive funding, is great for your CV and great for your company and for your R&D activities. What we have for today here are just examples of 3 such cascade funding opportunities, all for deadlines in September, but we expect those to be recurrent options. So even if you're not eligible for these current activities and current deadlines, you could go for the next ones. So what we have, just to look at the titles, we have, just so you can get a glimpse of that, we have Green SME, which offers very, very substantial, very varied topics relevant for all cluster 5. It is smaller, 35,000 euros, but it is a very nice grant. Climarest also calls for regional projects that center around climate resilience. Again, very broad, could be relevant to a lot of you, 100,000 euros grant. Then we have finally Elba Eurocluster, which focus on a very specific topic, offshore renewable energy. But what I say to clients, if you can contribute even part of a scope of a call, be that Horizon Europe, Cascade funding, any other call, you should try to engage such a proposal. Here we're talking about, for Elba Eurocluster, options either for single applicants or for 2 partners at 60,000 euros grant. So altogether, bringing our webinar to a close, and we'll just take a couple of slides to talk about Argentum, what we see is that Cluster 5 at the moment is a hot topic in the EU. We know that climate change and all the climate action in the EU have been hot topics for years. The current years have brought to the fore also aviation, hydrogen, new fuels, and a lot of other topics. Now, our proposition is that we know that there's an abundance of funding opportunities, and it can be challenging to navigate. So by working with us, we aim to elevate your capability of going for multiple submission strategy. We want you to engage both high calls with and funding directions with a relative high success rate, and calls which are very competitive and could, if won, land you with a very, very substantial grant, either as a single applicant or in part of a small consortium. We believe that our multi-submission strategy approach, the MSS, means that we can target throughout our agreement with you multiple calls, multiple funding sources in order to optimize your chances to get funded, as well as create a rational strategy for non-dilutive funding for you. At Argentum, we currently are familiar and working with around 120 funding sources. We aim to go for all funding mechanisms, be those European, such as the EIC tracks, bilateral calls, national, and we want you to go for calls as single applicants and consortia based. So altogether, what we have for you, for today, is we just want you to take from the webinar that Cluster 5 is a very hot topic in Europe at the moment. You've got multiple options as single applicants in bilateral calls with small size consortia and large consortia. And we are here to support your activities and to help you make the best out of your journey for non-dilutive funding. So thank you all for your time. Wishing you all a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.